Tommy, my sweet, imaginative Tommy, had always been a solitary child. He built castles in his sandbox and waged epic battles with his toy soldiers. I cherished these moments, watching him from the kitchen window, his little brow furrowed in concentration. One day a change occurred. Tommy began talking to someone or something else. He would giggle at unseen jokes and whisper responses to unheard questions. He called him Mr. Nobody. At first I dismissed it as a harmless, even healthy expression of his burgeoning imagination. Every child, I reasoned, had imaginary friends. But as days bled into weeks, a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. Tommy's once innocent conversations with Mr. Nobody took on a disturbing tone. His laughter became laced with malice. His whispers, once barely audible, grew into harsh, guttural pronouncements. One evening, while tucking Tommy into bed, I noticed a change in his demeanor. Gone was the sweet, innocent child who loved bedtime stories. In his place was a cold, calculating stranger. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now dark and vacant, like two bottomless pits staring back at me. A shiver ran down my spine. This was not my Tommy. Sleep, once a refuge, became an elusive dream. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of leaves against the window pane, sent shivers down my spine. And then, there were the whispers. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the night sounds of the house settling. But as the nights wore on, they grew louder, more insistent, winding their way into my dreams, turning them into nightmares. One night, unable to bear the oppressive silence any longer, I crept closer to Tommy's room. The door was slightly ajar and I could hear him whispering. It wasn't the innocent chatter of a child talking to an imaginary friend. This was different. This was cold, calculated, laced with an underlying menace that sent chills crawling up my arms. "He doesn't understand, Mr. Nobody," Tommy hissed, his voice a grotesque parody of its former innocence. "He doesn't understand what we're going to do." My blood ran cold. Who was he talking about, and what were they going to do? I pressed my ear closer to the door, desperate to hear more, but a floorboard creaked beneath my weight and the whispering abruptly ceased. The haze morphed into a blur of anxiety and dread. Tommy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He lashed out at the smallest provocation, his small hands balled into fists, his face contorted in a mask of rage. The sweet, loving child I knew seemed lost, replaced by a stranger who chilled me to the bone. I tried talking to him, tried to penetrate the wall that seemed to have risen between us, but my words were met with sullen silence, or worse, a chilling laughter that seemed to echo in my bones long after it had ceased. I felt a growing sense of helplessness, like a tiny boat being tossed about in a raging storm. My friends and family, concerned by my haggard appearance and Tommy's increasingly disturbing behavior, offered well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful advice. "He's just going through a phase. All children have imaginary friends." Their words rang hollow in my ears. I knew, in the depths of my heart, that something was terribly wrong. This was not a phase. This was something far more sinister. One afternoon, while preparing dinner, I heard a crash from Tommy's room. I rushed upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest, to find him standing in the middle of the room, his eyes wide and unblinking. The toy shelf lay overturned on the floor, its contents scattered across the room. "Tommy?" I said, my voice trembling. "What happened?" He didn't answer, he just stood there, his gaze fixed on something behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see, but there was nothing there. "Mr. Nobody doesn't like it when you talk to other people," Tommy said, his voice flat and emotionless. "He says they're not our friends." I felt a chill run down my spine. Mr. Nobody, he was real, he had to be, and he was dangerous. Desperate for answers, I began researching, spending countless hours poring over ancient texts and obscure websites. I learned about entities that could attach themselves to the living, feeding off their energy. Then, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold, a drawing of a creature so hideous it sent shivers down my spine. It was Mr. Nobody. The drawing described a creature that preyed on the innocent, using their imaginations as a gateway. It spoke of whispers, nightmares, and possession. I felt a knot of dread. This was happening to Tommy. I rushed to Tommy's room, my heart pounding. But when I reached his room, it was empty. The window was open, the curtains billowing, and on the floor next to crayons lay a piece of paper. Scrawled in Tommy's hand was a chilling sentence. "Mr. Nobody says it's time to go." Panic seized me. I raced from room to room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Tommy was gone, taken by that thing. I had to find him. I had to save him. But where do you even begin to look for a child who has been spirited away by an entity from another realm? Desperation clawed at the edges of my sanity. I needed help, guidance, anything that could lead me to my son. It was then, in the depths of my despair, that I remembered the old woman who lived at the edge of town. People whispered about her, said she dabbled in things best left undisturbed. They called her a witch, a crazy old woman. But I was desperate. I found her in her ramshackle cottage, surrounded by herbs and strange arcane symbols. Her eyes, ancient and wise, seemed to see straight through me, into the very depths of my soul. I poured out my story, my voice trembling with fear and urgency. To my surprise, she didn't scoff or dismiss my fears. She listened patiently, her gaze never leaving mine. The old woman nodded slowly, her face etched with concern. "You are not the first to come to me with such a tale," she said, her voice raspy with age. "Mr. Nobody is an ancient evil, a creature of shadow and whispers. He feeds on innocence, on imagination, and he is very real." My blood ran cold. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why my son?" The old woman sighed, her gaze distant. "He senses something in your boy," she said finally. "A gift, a sensitivity to the other side. Mr. Nobody seeks to corrupt that gift." I felt a surge of terror. My son, my innocent Tommy, caught in the clutches of an ancient evil. The old woman placed a reassuring hand on mine. "There is a way," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Are you willing to risk everything to save your son?" The old woman led me to a dusty corner of her cottage, where a single candle flickered on a makeshift altar. She handed me a small, leather-bound book. "This contains the ritual," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the candle flame. "But be warned, child. The spirit world is a dangerous place, especially for the unprepared. You must be strong. You must be brave." I clutched the book to my chest, my heart pounding. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it down, replacing it with a steely determination. I would save my son, no matter the cost. Following the old woman's instructions, I gathered the necessary ingredients: a lock of Tommy's hair, a drawing he had made of Mr. Nobody, and a silver mirror. As darkness fell, I began the ritual, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as I recited the ancient words. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Shadows danced in the flickering candlelight, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, the silver mirror in front of me began to glow, its surface swirling with an ethereal mist. An image began to form, hazy at first, then growing clearer. It was Tommy, but his eyes were not his own. They were cold, empty, filled with an ancient malice that chilled me to the bone. "Tommy!" I cried, my voice breaking with emotion. "It's me, Mommy! Don't you recognize me?" A chilling laughter echoed from the mirror, sending shivers down my spine. "Tommy is gone!" a voice hissed, cold and sharp as shattered glass. "He belongs to me now!" Despair threatened to consume me, but I clung to the last vestiges of hope. I would not give up. I would not let this monster win. "You will release him," I said, my voice shaking with a newfound resolve. "He is not yours to control." The entity in the mirror laughed, a sound devoid of humor, filled only with cruelty and contempt. "You are powerless against me," it hissed. "You are nothing but a fragile, insignificant human," but I refused to be cowed. I thought of Tommy, of his sweet smile, his infectious laughter, and a surge of love, fierce and protective, welled up inside me. "You're wrong," I said, my voice ringing with newfound strength. "A mother's love is the most powerful force in the universe, and I will not let you have him." I continued to speak, pouring all my love, all my hope into my words. I spoke of the bond between a mother and her child, a bond that transcended realms, that defied even the darkest of magic. As I spoke, I felt a shift in the air, a weakening in the entity's hold. The image in the mirror flickered, the entity's cold, cruel laughter replaced by a look of surprise, then fear. It had not anticipated this. It had underestimated the power of a mother's love. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, the entity in the mirror vanished, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. It was over. Mr. Nobody was gone. The next morning I awoke to find Tommy sleeping peacefully in his bed. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, that for a moment I allowed myself to believe it had all been a nightmare. But the shattered mirror on the floor, the lingering scent of ozone in the air, served as a chilling reminder of the night's events. Tommy never spoke of Mr. Nobody again, and I never told him the truth of what had transpired. But I knew, in the deepest recesses of my heart, that the entity was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to return. And so, I remained vigilant, ever watchful, a mother forever bound to protect her child from the unseen dangers that lurked just beyond the veil of reality.